Welcome to the Electric Wire Podcast. We bring you news and views on the most pressing issues facing Wisconsin's electric industry, from policymakers, executives, and customer and environmental advocates. Bringing you these discussions, we are the Customers First Coalition. Here's your host, Executive Director Kristen Jilks.
Welcome to the Electric Wire Podcast. I'm your host, Kristen Jilks, and I am joined today by a co-host who you may have heard on the podcast before. Matthew Spencer, Director of Government Affairs at Madison Gas and Electric, is with me today co-hosting. Welcome back, Spence.
Hey, Kristen. Thanks for having me back again.
Thank you. And our special guests today are two familiar faces to the renewable energy scene here in Wisconsin. First, we have Peder Mewis, who is a Regional Policy Director at the Clean Grid Alliance. Welcome, Peder.
Thanks, Kristen.
And we have Mike Kuglitsch. And Mike, this is your second time on the podcast, this time in a different role. Mike is a principal at Michael Best Strategies, LLC, and through his work at Michael Best also is working on Powering Wisconsin, which we are excited to hear more about. So welcome back, Mike.
Thank you, Kristen. It's good to see Spence and Peder today.
I want to ask you both to tell us a little bit more about your background and how you got started in energy issues and why energy issues are so important to you. Peder, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Kristen. My history working on renewable energy, it goes back quite a few years. I spent 11 and a half years in my early career in the state legislature in Minnesota as a staffer for the Republican caucus there. And I served as the committee administrator for the Energy, Utility, and Telecommunications Committee. And I really kind of took an interest, of all the things you can take an interest in the legislature, I really liked energy, and it was very much a new technology, and we were really starting to see it take off. You know, Governor Pawlenty in previous years had signed the Next Generation Energy Act. It was like the first major piece of legislation that had bipartisan support to move the ball forward on renewable energy. And as a Republican, I saw it as an issue that shouldn't have been a divisive one. I thought it should have been an issue that both Republicans and Democrats could get behind and support. And we'll certainly talk more about that as we go through this as to why I think that's the case. And then I just really liked Clean Grid Alliance. We were called Wind on the Wires at the time. It was a thoughtful a center organization that focused on wind development in its early years, you know, across the Dakotas and, you know, southwestern Minnesota and the Buffalo Ridge. And so after applying twice, I finally got hired. And so I've been working with Clean Grid for 6.5 years now, and it's been a great experience. And, you know, having good Republican credentials bodes well for states like Indiana, states like Wisconsin, where I reside as well, and of course the Dakotas. And so it's been a great fit. I've really enjoyed how fast the technology moves forward and how we're just seeing that this is primarily the future of energy across the Midwest.
Thanks, Peder. I appreciate your background and I have a similar one, to be honest. All right, Mike, tell us more about your background, even though most of us already know.
So, as a recovering state legislator, you know, in the state assembly, I had the opportunity to be the energy utility chair of the committee for 8 years. I had some real good staff at the time, which made me look good, and that's Spence over there.
Yeah, he's talking about me. He's talking about me.
And then I had the opportunity to chair at the national level for an organization called American Legislative Exchange Council. I, for 3 years, chaired the National Committee of Energy, Environment, and Ag for ALEC for 3 years. So when you're in those roles, you really get introduced to a lot of energy challenges, a lot of the issues, a lot of the concerns that are out there. And you get also the opportunity to find out about how the industry and energy is evolving. And it's something that I've always been interested in is new things and evolution. And that has kept me interested in energy. When I left the legislature and at Michael Best Strategies, I had the opportunity to work with Powering Wisconsin and Peder. And we can talk more about Powering Wisconsin, I think, a little bit further in the podcast.
Well, why don't we do that right now? So, Peder, Mike, how did Powering Wisconsin start over the past few years? It's been around for what, 2 years, 3 years now in Wisconsin?
We launched in December of 2022. Is that right? 2.
Yep.
So yeah, just to give you a little background, for many years, I've been covering Wisconsin since I've been with CGA, but for many years, the state had been very quiet. There just wasn't a lot of activity in the legislative process. You had divided government. But as the price of solar and the efficiencies of solar really started to, and the economics really started to take off for upper Midwestern states. We've always thought solar as being something you do in the South and the Southwest because that's where the sun shines. But that changed, with economics and efficiencies. And so Wisconsin became one of the early adopters of large-scale renewable solar development, across the footprint we worked in. And so as more and more projects were being proposed, working its way through the PSC process, getting constructed, coming online, there was also an increased concern amongst our membership that we were going to see more opposition at the local level. This was going to start to bubble up at the legislature. And there was this yearn by our membership to protect the good policies in the state of Wisconsin. And so I had some members approach me 2.5 years ago saying, hey, I think we need to do something fairly robust in the state of Wisconsin. And so at that time, I spent all of 2022 having various conversations with a lot of our member companies, the active ones, and said, hey, I'd like to put together a coalition in the state. And so that was a ton of work that I had to do on the back end to convince the members. And at this time, we had to do the pass the hat. So each member company had to pay so that we could build this contract. Well, now we have a C6, so it's Clean Grid Alliance, but we're also Clean Grid Association on paper so that we can do more advocacy work. And then Jeff Danielson, my VP of State Affairs, and I were in Madison, and we were recommended to meet with Mike Kuglitsch and his team, and we pitched the idea. And I think what's unique to Powering Wisconsin is that we wanted a one-stop shop of full lobbying capacity, which Mike leads on. We also wanted a public affairs, kind of public relations component. And with that, we wanted some branding. We wanted a simple website and some other things. And so that was the initial step. And then later that year in 2022, we finalized things with Mike Kuglitsch and his team at Best Strategies, and we got to work so that we were ready to go, the first of the year. And I'm very pleased with the success that we've had. It's a model for the rest of the states that we work in the Midwest. And so we could talk a little bit more about the things we've been working on, but yeah, it's been a great success, and I couldn't be more pleased with the choices that we've made and the partnerships that we've built here.
Perfect. Thanks. Mike, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, let me just add a little bit we've been able to put together a really good team at Michael Best Strategies. From the GR side, myself and Sabrina Stencil, which she just got married. I'm sorry, she's now Sabrina Stengel as of a couple of weeks ago.
Congrats, Sabrina.
Yes, and then as Peder mentioned, when we were putting this Powering Wisconsin coalition together, we talked about the PR and comms because we knew that there was going to be a time where we need to really go out and promote renewables, promote personal property rights, promote the economic development. And you can only do so much of that within the confines of the Capitol. So on our PR side, we have Joe Fadness and Caden Vasquez and Alicia Gunther, who do wonderful jobs. So I think combined, we've been able to put together a product that has been responsive to the developers, has been a product that has been educational within the building, and then also that has been beneficial for the communities that we develop in.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Peder, you mentioned some of the good policies that we have here in Wisconsin, and I was hoping you could just elaborate a little bit more about that. Like, what made Wisconsin stand out as having good policies that would be worthy of protecting?
That's a great question. It's one of the biggest issues that we deal with at Clean Grid Alliance from the state level. The most important thing we work on is siting and permitting. And when you look across the footprint of the states that we work in, basically all your upper Midwestern states from Michigan to Indiana to Illinois, all the way over to the Dakotas and everything in between. You know, there's a lot of different ways that you can site and permit large energy facilities. You could do it how Michigan, we changed that law, which we could talk a little bit about. They currently do until we get things in place. All large energy facilities are permitted at the township level. So you can understand the complexities that can come with that. If you're going to build a wind project in Michigan, you could cross 5 or 6 townships. Those townships have sole authority to permit things, to zone things, to site things any way they want, put moratoriums in place. Or you have a state like Indiana, where you have a third of the counties where you effectively can't build anything there. So like basically a third of the state is off limits. Then if you take a look at a state like North Dakota and South Dakota, which is a hybrid model where you need some local permits, but you also need a permit from the state Public Service Commission. If you look at a state like Minnesota and Wisconsin, everything is permitted at the state level, you know, once you get to a certain threshold. So anything over 100 in Wisconsin is permitted at the commission. Anything under is done at the local level. Minnesota, it's 100 for wind and 50 for solar at the commission. Anything below is done at the county level. And what we've learned over the years is that that stable environment of having technical professionals and a very robust legal process at the state level has been the most effective way to do these things. And I would say, you know, as an example, in Michigan, when we made a big push once the Democrats took control of the trifecta in the last midterm election, or the last general election, we recognized that siting and permitting was a huge roadblock for us to develop in that state. And so that was our main focus at Clean Grid, was working on siting and permitting. And then the governor, Gretchen Whitmer, came out and said, we're going to do a carbon-free standard, just like Minnesota. And so we really leaned in and said, we appreciate that, but siting and permitting is almost more important than that. And finally, she understood that it was very much complementary into achieving that 2040 goal. So that was part of the package. And so I would say that Wisconsin was a model that they looked at, and many aspects of that are complementary to Wisconsin. And so, you know, the process for you know, the public input process, the stability, the understanding of the developers is what's required of them through the Wisconsin process is like the most important piece. And so that was part of the reason why we created Powering Wisconsin, is to protect that process, because it's one of the best models in the Midwest.
Hey, Peder, could you just kind of like walk through from like a 10,000 foot level from like before the process even started, talking with landowners to, you know, completion, just so like what it actually details in Wisconsin?
Yeah, I would say I will avoid getting into the nitty-gritty details of the permitting.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You know, I would say, you know, it's pretty straightforward. You know, there's a couple things that developers look for when they want to develop a project. First, they need to look at maps to determine where the bulk transmission system is, where interconnection points to plug into that bulk system are maybe available. Is there capacity there? There's a lot of technical things that they look at. So they look at points of interconnect. That's primary number one. And then secondly, they look at are there willing landowners that would be interested in participating in a project? And I just want to make this clear that everything that we do, all of our developers in every state, we work on, everything is a voluntary agreement, everything. There's no forcing anybody to do anything. So they look for willing landowners, and if they can find willing landowners, and they're also looking for, if it's a solar project, they're looking for flat areas. If they're looking to do a wind project, they're testing for wind speeds over a given amount of time to see if they can make the economics work, with a wind project. And then when they got those pieces, those couple pieces in place, then they will file a, sometimes they'll do this years in advance, a generator interconnection request with the regional grid operator that says, we want to interconnect at this point. And then there's a very long, complex process to study what impact that project would have if you interconnected at that point. It all comes down to dollars and cents, and that's a much broader discussion for another day. And then usually, after that, then they will start meeting with local officials, township officials, county officials, having open houses saying, hey, look, we're thinking about coming into your community, trying to build that public support, that public trust, because without that, you don't get a project built. And then once they got those pieces in place, then they will file their permit application with the Public Service Commission. And that sort of starts the clock once, the completeness of that application is determined. And then throughout that process, you have to do environmental review. There's a whole bunch of different opportunities for landowners and local officials and the public to intervene, provide comment. And that is taken very seriously by the Public Service Commission. I can attest to that from experience, whether it's in Wisconsin or Minnesota. They're very concerned about how the locals feel about this stuff. And if there's some serious consternation with the township officials or something, they will instruct the developers to say, you need to fix that and find a path forward before we are going to give you a permit. And so then through that process, you're looking at a year and some change, depending on the complexities. And then ultimately on the other end, you would get a generating certificate, from the Public Service Commission, which allows you to move forward. Then finally, I know this is long-winded, there's a very important piece to this, which is, these joint developer agreements that they agree to with local units of government for road use and road repairs, and some other things that are, very important aspects that are done at the local level to ensure that those communities are made whole throughout the process of construction and operation and decommissioning.
Let me just add a couple things, and there's some really important points that Peter mentioned. Before the CPCN process or the PSC really gets involved, I think the main component that Peter mentioned is you have to have farmers or landowners that want to participate, right? So if there aren't individuals that volunteer to participate in this program, it doesn't happen. I think sometimes there's this perception that these wind or solar projects are being forced upon individuals, and it's not. I mean, it basically is a business proposition for the farmers or the landowners. And for a lot of, especially the farmers, being able to lease their land and have a guaranteed revenue stream for 25 years, it allows them to keep the farm in the family. It allows them to, maybe they don't have children that want to take it on, that they can continue with their land ownership. So I think there's a lot of extra benefits that come about from the renewable projects. But the one misnomer that this is forced upon people is not. This is a volunteer program. And if there weren't individuals that wanted to participate, these projects wouldn't happen. And I think that's important. And then the other fact that once it gets to the PSC in the CPCN process, that takes a minimum of 12 months. So this is not something that is rushed through. And I know there's at least a minimum of 6 touch points between public and the PSC in this whole application process. So it is robust and it is a volunteer program. And I think another issue is that farmers and landowners, it's their personal property. They have personal property or private property rights. And I think it's important that if a farmer wants to harvest the sun or the wind, that he should have those private property rights and he should be able to do that.
Thanks, guys. Peder, and thank you, Mike, for sort of expounding a little bit on some of the opportunities for the public to participate in the process. And Peder, you had been mentioning that Wisconsin could serve as a model for other states in some aspects of the siting process. And so I'm wondering specifically on public participation, how are we giving people a chance to participate and make their opinions heard throughout the process?
Well, I mean, I think to Mike's point, without not getting too specific, I mean, let's say you're a non-participating adjacent landowner to a project, and maybe you don't like it. I know this from experience. You can go talk to the developer. Sometimes the developer reaches out directly and says, this is my backyard, and I don't want to necessarily have to look at these solar panels, which might be right out here. Can you redesign the plan so you move them a little bit? Could you do some fencing for me? And most of the times the developers are very receptive to those non-participating landowners. They can also go to their township board or their county board and express their concerns. That can then be reflected directly up to the commission level, which they pay attention to all that's in the record. Or they can file comments directly in the docket, which can be a complex process. And trust me, if you try to do any regulatory work, it's not always easy to track all that stuff, but it's not impossible. And the commission is very good. I mean, if you were to call the commission and say, hey, I got a proposed solar project in my backyard and I'd like to know more about it and how I could be part of the process, the commission's super helpful. They'll tell them what the docket is, how to sign up, the different points along the way where they can comment. And I can just say from experience, like that's the whole purpose of the public record, is that the commission has to take all of the things that come into the public record into consideration, when they are debating and looking to approve or deny a permit application for, whatever facility you're building. And of course, much of the PSC process is based on laws and administrative rules, and they have to follow those. And there's a very specific process that the legislature has laid out for them to follow. But the most important piece is that, the commission speaks with their orders and through the record, and everybody has an opportunity to participate in that process. And I would just say one last thing to Mike's point, if you, in an example of Indiana where, a third of the counties are off business or out, you can't do any business there. If you're a landowner in one of those counties, government's telling you that you can do anything you want with your property except host a wind or a solar panel. And we just can't get off that is the most important piece to all this, is personal private property rights. As long as you're not polluting the environment or destroying your neighbor's property, you should have every right, under the government system to do what you want with your property.
I'm not sure if this is for you, Peder, or Mike, but so you're getting a lot of feedback through either town boards or at the commission through the dockets. Are the developers working to improve practices for these siting? Are they putting up bigger berms or noise mitigation? I know it's not as big of an issue for solar, but are the developers working with the neighbors to make sure that they're at ease to keep these projects moving forward in Wisconsin?
So this is what I have witnessed. The developers are willing to work with the locals and are willing to work with individual landowners to try and mitigate any concern or issue. But unfortunately, what we've seen is there's some people that just, for whatever reason, don't like it, don't want it, and makes it challenging. But I have the different groups that I have seen, different developers, their priority is to work with the locals and work with the individual landowners so that obviously the project goes forward. And they make that effort, and just sometimes, no matter what they put forward, just isn't gonna satisfy people. And Peter, you might be able to go more into specifics, but that is what I found kind of from the 30-foot level.
No, I think Mike's exactly right. I mean, you have just there's no, it's like there's a lot of people that just base, their decisions based on emotions, and it's hard to sort of, argue with somebody's emotions. I would say though that some developers do an excellent job and some developers maybe don't do such a great job. I mean, without, that's the importance of a regional trade organization like Clean Grid Alliance, or like a sister organization like Powering Wisconsin, like being part of these groups so that we're all working together and make sure that we're not, because all it takes is one bad project to sort of upset kind of sentiment across the state. And, that's the reason why we exist. This is the reason why Powering Wisconsin exists, is that if the developers aren't doing a good job at the local level, that's going to bubble up into the legislature. And then the legislature is going to say, well, I'm just going to make different decisions on how these people are allowed to do business in this state. So I would say, generally speaking, in my 6.5 years working on this, the developers are starting to get a lot better at understanding the importance of public relations, sponsoring local events, setting up community funds, all these things. And I can see that with firsthand. There's a project just southeast of me here in Dunn County that's done a fantastic job through their local engagement process. Now we have very specific firms. At least one of them is a member of CGA. That's all they do is local outreach and public engagement. So and then some of the companies too are really starting to build out their local engagement divisions within their companies, because they recognize the very high importance of ensuring that you have that good local respect and relationships, because we're talking 25, 30 years, maybe longer, that these projects are going to be within these communities. And then I would say finally, Matt, just to your point about best practices, I would say, whether it's allaying people's concerns or moving projects or doing fencing, or we've learned a lot about shadow flicker. The wind industry is very mature across the Midwest. We understand how shadow flicker works. We understand how noise standards and what best practices are there, and some other things. So, I think solar is a little bit behind, but I think it's a very different creature than wind is. It's more of just about view shed or closeness versus actual true health effects. But I think the industry is moving forward, and they recognize that without doing all these important things, that you're just not going to be able to build stuff.
We talk about the importance of setting up groups like Powering Wisconsin, and keeping best practices, but why is renewable energy an important part of the mix? And in the first place, like why do we need it? What's the future of it here in Wisconsin? And how can we help more communities embrace the benefits of renewable energy?
Well, I'll take that first question, then Mike can take the second one on the economic benefits. But we're just seeing a massive shift in the resource mix across the country. I mean, we'll just stay specific on the Midwest, but this is primarily being driven by economics. And there's a lot of, we're seeing nearly every coal plant has a scheduled retirement date, across the Midwest, including very red states. And it's because the utilities see a couple things. One is there's a risk to keeping these plants open because of federal law around, EPA regulations around smog and other, environmental issues. So that's one. You have fuel costs that, could change over the years. And then frankly, just the nature of the power market through the system operator. At many times of the year, these coal plants that might be on a what they would consider a must-run scenario. So they basically run all the time as a designation, but they're taking the real-time price of electricity, and oftentimes that price of electricity is much lower than what they need to operate these plants and then recover the costs. And then I would just say, renewables, I mean, there's no fuel cost. You will never have a fuel cost. So that's something that's totally taken out of the, completely out of the equation. And it doesn't emit any carbon dioxide, which is another consideration. And, the utilities, you only have to look as far as them as they see the value and the economics of moving towards renewable energy. And then frankly, just the demand from the, commercial industrial customers. Now with the advent of artificial intelligence, which still terrifies me, to data centers and other things, like we are now for the first time in decades are going to see a massive demand for electricity load growth. And so, yeah, we got a lot of challenges. I mean, this is no easy task. I mean, there's no question that wind and solar are intermittent resources where you can run a combined cycle gas plant or a coal plant or a nuke plant basically all the time, but everything has sort of trade-off values. And that's why I'm excited about the industry, is because now as we see the economics of battery storage and the different types of technology with battery storage, it's going to be an incredible complement to help balancing the grid over the long term. And this is something we can't stop. We can't put our head in the ground and say, well, we're just going to run our coal plants indefinitely. It's just not going to happen, because this is where the market's going and we're embracing it, and it's moving really, really fast. But we do have to ensure that the lights stay on all the time, because all it would take is for one state, a Republican state, to have a couple of brownouts, for a few hours or days throughout the year because of some load issues, and they could enact policies that says we're done with this. We're keeping our coal plants running. We're going to run all of our gas plants. We're going to build all kinds of new stuff, because if the regional grid operator can't keep the lights on, by God, me as a legislator, I'm going to make sure that the lights stay on. So it's a difficult balancing act. But with that, I'll let Mike answer. But the economic value and benefit is a huge component to this beyond just cheap, clean electricity.
So Peter mentioned some really important points, and just to kind of bring it to Wisconsin, Wisconsin consumes nearly 6 times as much energy as it produces. So when you look at that, and then you look at the advent of, for the first time in a long time, that demand is not flat, but it's going up for the reasons that Peter mentioned. It's logical that we need additional generation in the state of Wisconsin. And when you look at the fact that the EPA just came out last week, I think with even tighter emissions on coal plants, which is just gonna, I think, exasperate the coal plants closing. So, we need additional generation. And when you look at what is the cheapest, what is the cleanest, right now that's wind and solar. I mean, with the technical advances, wind and solar has become the most efficient and cost-effective energy source on the market right now. So when you couple the fact that we need some additional homegrown energy generation in Wisconsin, what is the most cost-effective and efficient? And then again, at the end of the day, it's clean, no carbon emissions. And then the last one, which I'd probably just add to that, is this is also a revenue source that a farmer or landowner can use. And you don't get that with the others.
It's not just that, Mike. I mean, I'm not sure if you or Peter want to answer this one, but well, to your point too, it takes the risk out of the fuel prices for everybody. See, you don't have to worry about how much coal is going to cost you. You don't have to worry about how much gas is going to cost you. You know, sunshine and winds blowing, and now with batteries, you can retain some of that, and dispatch it. You know, if necessary. But you mentioned the farmer, you mentioned a landowner, but there's also got to be some sort of economic benefit to the actual communities that are bringing these things in. And I'm not sure if it's you, Mike, or if you, Peter, want to answer that. But I know that there is an economic benefit for a town or a county when these things are being developed.
So I'll tell you what, Peter, I'll take a shot at it, and then you can. So I think there's a number of them. So first off, if you look at during construction, you're going to have a couple years where you're going to have just automatic infusion of dollars to the local economy with the construction workers, possibly hotels, restaurants, local stores, supplies. So that's one infusion. But then you also have JDAs, and those are joint development agreements between the local communities and the developers. And they're not just repairing roads, but it's also school funding. They fund community projects. The developers are great sponsors, and they have sponsorships for the local communities. And then when you look at the big economic benefit is utility aid, which when you look at the utility aid compared to what farmers pay for their property taxes, it's significant. And you can't really put a factor on it because those rates all change, but it's significant to the point where it's $5,000 per megawatt. Okay. And now you look at an average development is now around 300 megawatts. So even my UW Whitewater education says that's 1.5 million. I think I got the zeros. And then that's divided between the counties and the towns, or the counties and the villages. So this is additional on a yearly basis that those communities receive that can do what? A, it can increase services in the community. B, it could possibly, give a local elected official the idea to maybe lower taxes. I mean, that's a possibility. And then 3 is we talked about the income stream to the farmers and landowners. So there are many economic benefits that the local communities and individuals will see with renewable development. Peter, anything you can add?
I would just add, I mean, it's a significant infusion of money to these rural communities. I mean, when I look at rural North Dakota or rural South Dakota, where some of these counties only have like 1,200 people, like you bring in a 300 megawatt wind project and all the tax revenue that comes with it. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's an unbelievable game changer for these local communities that are strapped for resources. I'll give you one example. We didn't do it, but some other folks did a comparison of 2 different counties in Michigan. One county that embraced wind development and another county that rejected it. And they have interviews with the various local officials of those 2 communities. And it's an absolute stark difference between the county that embraced the wind development, was able to buy new police cars and first responders and build new buildings, capital investment, repair and resurface roads, and they were able to keep taxes flat. You compare that to the other county, it's the exact opposite. All of their equipment is failing. They've had to raise taxes on an ever smaller population of people, so it's even harder for those people to help fund those things. And so it's a very stark contrast. And I would say that the stuff that we're building here are going into rural communities that don't have a whole lot of economic development. So there's a compounding factor as to the benefits that are provided. And this is long-term stable money for 25, 30 years. And it's a big important piece to all of this.
Can either of you guys talk a little bit more about just new technologies that are, will help maximize the benefits of these projects? So, new solar panels, bifacial solar panels, wind blade technologies, batteries. I think they kind of all feel like the industry didn't really make a big changes over the past 100 years, and I feel like everything's changing so quick. So if you have some information on like just the new technologies, I think it'd be good for the listener here.
Yeah, I would just maybe a good example is if you walk the floor of the Clean Power Conference a couple of weeks ago in Minneapolis. It's unbelievable how quickly the technologies are changing with different types of applications for wind blades to make them cut in faster, to the ability to pitch blades. We're seeing now that they're building, the wind turbines are getting bigger with higher megawatt capacities. Cut-in speeds are a lot lower. They can reach maximum generation output at much lower speeds. And in that case, it also reduces the amount of turbines that you need for a project like, you would have seen 10 or 12 years ago. But once again, this is driven by the market, because the market is realized, the industry realizes that if we can make the best and most efficient widget at the cheapest price, that's the one that's going to get sold on the open market. And so, without getting too specific, I mean, I think you're right. The bifacial solar panel is a huge advancement, as I just mentioned about the turbines. And basically what you're trying to achieve is just trying to maximize your energy output, over the course of a year. And without getting to specific numbers, when you're talking about capacity values for wind, in the early years have dramatically increased, especially Wisconsin's a great example. Like, you can, with the new technology, you can build a wind plant in an area of Wisconsin that doesn't have, it's not the equivalent of the Buffalo Ridge or of North Dakota, but because the technology has advanced so much, it's now an attractive place to put a wind farm. Same thing with solar. Like, we wouldn't have built solar in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and other states a decade ago because the economics didn't make sense, the technology didn't make sense. And then battery storage is fascinating, which I don't even have a good sense, but I mean, you have the iron ore rust batteries, that 2 pilot projects that are going in Minnesota with Great River Energy and Xcel Energy, and you're basically taking the natural rusting of iron ore and you're creating a battery out of it. I don't understand how the technology works, but I mean, the advancements are happening so quickly that, things are only going to get better, cheaper, and more efficient. Then I would say, other technologies like green hydrogen, which is just an emerging technology, is also probably going to be a big player in the industry. And it's just starting to merge. And I think you're starting to see some down in Texas and some other states. So, what we think is the future today certainly isn't. And, I think it's almost impossible to see what the next best thing is 5 years from now, because there's a lot of things that we just don't even know yet.
I have a kind of a adjacent question to this too, because I think everything is changing so quickly. Can you talk about the benefit? Like, everything is monetarily makes sense now. It economically makes sense. And then you have the IRA and the tax credits with this. How important are those for the industry?
Well, I would say that the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act was a significant piece to this. I can tell you, without the tax credits, we'd still be moving forward. As you're aware, Matthew and Mike, I mean, these tax credits have started and stopped, and then they would renew them for a few years and then stop them. And the guidance around the tax credits right now are much more significant than they have been in the past. They encourage, prevailing wage and project labor agreements with organized labor. Are you building these in disadvantaged communities, which also helps with the tax credits? That now with this big move for domestic manufacturing of all the goods and services that we provide for these things, whether it's steel, panels, blades, towers, everything, is all with a focus on domestic and disadvantaged communities and all these other things. We can all have a debate all day long about tax credits and where we all stand on, but as a country, if we've decided as a country, the federal government has decided that this is important to us to have domestic energy sources and move to a cleaner electricity sector. And so that is the decision that the federal government made. And like I said, we can all debate whether we like that or not, that is the rules of the road. It's no different than if a state decides that they want to have the most renewable energy, their policies are going to reflect that. Their permitting process is going to reflect that. If you want to be the #1 corn or soybean or hog producer, you're going to enact policies within your state to try to achieve those goals and reflect that vision of what you're trying to achieve. So, yes, the federal guidance around this is also a significant piece, but it also brings some stability and certainty over the next decade and even longer.
And something I think I just want to add is that tax credits, Spence, I think when we were together, we did a little study about all energy generation and to find out, was it just renewables that were getting tax credits or subsidies? And we found that it didn't matter what energy sector it was, that every energy sector is subsidized some way by the federal or state government. So yes, they're here in a perfect free market society. Could we get rid of all tax credits and government subsidies? Yes, that would probably be utopia. But the fact is that there are subsidies, and no matter how you or what you call them, they're out there for every energy sector out.
Thanks, guys. All right, Spence, do you mind if we turn to you now for a quick question? As we're talking about benefits for the community, landowners, there's benefits for utility customers too from renewable energy projects, both large and small. And I'm hoping that you could talk a little bit more about the ways that your customers benefit from these projects.
Just from start to finish, I mean, like we work with for our utility scale solar projects, we're working with the developers who are working with the landowners who are hiring workers in the area to develop those. And that is overall what the state is doing, and generally what the utility market is doing across the country to clean the grid. We have a 2030 plan and a 2050 plan, net zero carbon by 2050. These projects are helping us, the utility scale projects are helping us move as fast as we can to clean the grid. On a smaller level, on a smaller level for like our community solar projects, we're not using developers, we're building them ourselves with labor that we've developed. Take a good example of that is the O'Brien farm that we went to a few months ago now, for one of your podcasts. And it's like, we work with the landowner. We know what our customers want. They want to be able to buy in and buy shares of a regulated community solar program. So that's what we keep building. We're developing smaller utility scale, we're developing smaller community solar projects across our service territory, smaller solar projects across our service territory, and then we're working with developers to clean the grid as fast as we can. It's certainty. You put the steel in the ground, and you know the output you're going to be getting. You don't have to take, like I said earlier, it takes the risk out of it. You don't have to worry about the EPA coming in and mandating a shutdown of coal or new coal scrubbers, volatile gas prices. Once it's in, it's in. And then just, being Madison Gas and Electric, your community utility company, they want to see us do it. So
thank you all. And we are now at the final question for all of our guests, which is, if you had all the power in the industry, what would you do with it? All right, Mike,
okay.
I'll start with you if that's all right.
Great. If I had the magic wand or king for the day, is let's make energy issues more specific, generation issues, let's make them nonpartisan. And let's look at what is best for the ratepayers, what is best for individuals, and let's embrace new technologies.
Speaking my language, Mike. Sounds good. Peter, how about you?
Well, I totally agree with Mike. Being a Republican and being on the when I first started working on the stuff, I was on the wrong side of history, and I always disagreed with my Republican allies, and we've seen things change quite a bit over the years. For me, it would probably be how can we better provide reforms at the regional grid operator level, whether it's where we live in MISO, or our neighbors with SPP to the west, or our neighbors with PJM to the east, and how can we do a better job of collectively trying to figure out how to unlock the bottlenecks so that we can get more transmission lines developed, how we can get more projects in the ground as these scheduled baseload thermal units are scheduled to retire, and how can we do a better job of interconnecting all of the grids so that we can all share, as sort of a national, at least a very large regional grid, share resources every day, every year, and that will harden the grid. It will reduce our worries about brownouts and blackouts, and it will also drive the cheapest, most efficient prices of electricity all the time. That would be that would be my and I don't know how you would wave the wand at that, but I think that's ultimately where we need to go, and that's probably the most difficult hurdle we're facing right now.
Well said, Peter. I agree with you.
Agreed. And we manifest a lot of things here on this podcast and in our all the power moments. So the first thing is to speak it into existence. So thank you for sharing those insights with us, both of you, and we really appreciated your time today.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Matthew. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Peter.
You.
Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, Spencey Spence.
You got it.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. Please support our work. You can subscribe to the Electric Wire podcast if you haven't already, and you can follow us on Twitter @The Electric Wire. Thanks also to the members of the Customers First Coalition for supporting this podcast. Our members are Dairyland Power Cooperative, Madison Gas and Electric, the Municipal Electric Utilities of Wisconsin, WPPI Energy, the Citizens Utility Board, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Local 2150, and the Wisconsin Electric Cooperatives Association. Thanks again for listening. We'll have a new episode next month.